Okay, and welcome to this tutorial on the while loop. This will be pretty short and won't cover all the things you can do with a while loop, but it will give you enough information to solve challenge number 3. So the while loop is pretty similar to the for loop and also shares some commonalities with if statements. Basically, the way it works is you're going to tell the Arduino to keep doing something while a statement is true. So if we look here, while the statement is true, do this thing. So for instance, we might say while x is equal to 0, while x is greater than 0, while digital read A5 equals low, while a variable is equal to something. There's all kinds of ways that we could use the while loop. One situation where we might want to use the while loop is to write some code that will blink an LED at one speed when a button is pushed and at a different speed when a button is not pushed. So here I've written some code. You can see the LED blinks quite slowly, relatively slowly. But when I push the button, it blinks much, much faster. When I let go of the button, it goes back to blinking slowly. So if we look at the code here, you can see that I'm telling the Arduino that while button or digital read A5 is high, digital write too high, delay 100, digital write too low, delay 100. So every 100 milliseconds, the LED is switching states from high to low or from low to high. Then if the button is not being pushed, we come down here and you can see that the delay is 200 milliseconds, so twice as long. If we were to use an if statement, we might say if digital read A5 equals high, do this. It would do this, but then it would come here and do this anyways. With the while loop, as long as digital read A5 equals high, it'll continue looping through itself. So again, when the button is pressed, we see a much faster blinking. When the button is not pressed, we see a much slower blinking. So when the button is pressed, it's only looping through here. When the button's not pressed, it's coming through here. Coming up here, it's saying A5 isn't high, so it'll just come back down here and loop through this again. So another way that we could use the while loop, and it's certainly not the only way, and I certainly haven't covered all the ways, is to wait for an input. So in this case, I want my code to wait until I push a button and then to start flashing the light. And we're going to imagine that there's some code up here doing something and some code down here doing something. And we've come through our code and suddenly we want to stop and we want to wait. Wait until the button is pushed. So I've written wait while digital read A5 equals low, do nothing. It's written this way because digital read A5 is going to default to low as long as the button's not pressed. So the Arduino comes along here, it comes to this while statement, it asks, is A5 low? It is low, and it gets caught, and it'll just keep looping through this while statement until A5 ceases to become low, or stops being low. That would happen when the button's pressed. Once the button's pressed, it'll come down here, and it'll continue with the code. In this case, it'll start blinking this light. So in action, we can see, maybe we'll debug it, we'll put a little pause here. So right now, nothing's happening. It's stuck in this while loop, and it'll just keep going through this while loop until something changes. And that something changing is going to be pressing this button. Once we press A5, it breaks out of the while loop and continues on with the code. The only other thing to note is that you can have the same kind of operators as we had in the if statements, so we aren't limited to just using one. We can use things like and or to add additional conditions to our while loop.